Hey everybody, this is the first video of a video series I'm doing on basically how to design the airframe of an RC airplane. And it's basically not just the airframe, it's the entire airplane. I mean, I'm talking about, you know, the systems that will go into it and everything. But I want to dive into this, and of course I've got my notes right here. And this video took a long time because this is like the fourth time I've shot it, because it just has never felt right with the way I'm wanting to start this video series. So I want to start with, what are you going to build? Okay, many people, when they decide to design their first airframe, I would say most of them go after some type of a World War I or a World War II airframe. Sometimes they'll go after general aviation, but not as the norm. I mean, unless you're building for scale competition. And then some people do like air racers, like GBs and stuff. Now, I've always used my GB as kind of my model that I use for instructional purposes, and I'm going to do it today. But what you really got to think about when you're going to design an airplane, and look, everybody, you know, let's make this really clear. I'm only sharing my experiences over 20 or 25 years. I mean, I've been in model aviation since the late 70s, but I've only been building my own airplanes since the late 80s, where I've actually designed it myself and built it and then flew it, okay? And it's only been the last maybe 20 years or 18 years where I've really dove in to doing giant scale airplanes and with all their systems and stuff. But first of all, you got to decide, what size are you going to make the airplane? I love to make them big because they're easier to me. Now, they're much more expensive in many circumstances, and I'll dive into that also. But let's think fundamentally, what are you wanting to build? So let's just say, for the sake of this video, it's a GB. Okay? Everybody said GBs are some of the most horrible airplanes that was ever designed, which is totally inaccurate. If you talk to Delmar Benjamin, who flew the replica to all the air shows in the 80s, if you read about the original pilots that flew the GB, the only time it was dangerous is when they were trying to push it beyond its limit. As a functioning flying airplane, it was quite stable, and it had a really good wing load. What makes it bad for a model aircraft is how short from the CG, which is about here on the wing, to where the engine is. I mean, there is no nose on this. The reason that is the real one had a massive radial engine and an all-wood airframe, so the nose couldn't be too long or it would be nose heavy. Keep in mind, the more you push that motor out, the more you're putting that weight ahead of the center of gravity. So a lot of airplanes, the nose links are designed depending on the weight of the engine. And you see some modern turbines that have these really long noses, turboprops. Well, the reason they got that long nose is that turboprop doesn't weigh anything to like a flat 6-cylinder boxer engine or a radial engine. So the mass of the motor is what controls your center of gravity in an airframe design, or it's one of the contributing factors. So on a model GB, we don't have a big honking heavy piece of metal to put up front. And we also build with materials that makes the tail very heavy. So, you know, when you think of my MSL2, it kind of has a long nose, but also the entire tail section of that aircraft is balsa wood. It's balsa sticks. It does have a couple of plywood bulkheads in it, but everything in the tail, the horizontal and vertical stabilizer, is 100% balsa wood. So I did that to try to keep all the weight out of the tail of the airplane. So, you know, when you're thinking of designing an airframe, you need to think about, how big do I want it to be? A larger GB could sometimes end up having 20 or 30 pounds of ballast in the nose just to get the center of gravity right. A smaller GB, believe it or not, because the motor is already kind of heavy, may not need as much nose weight. But when you get a half-scale GB and put a 200cc engine in it, that 200cc engine doesn't weigh maybe, what, 13, 14 pounds. The amount of mass it takes to get the center of gravity right might be 40 pounds in the nose of that GB. And I know that sounds insane. But those are some of the things you've got to think about. So what size is it going to be? Let's say you're going to build something with like a 60-inch wing. Well, then you have to decide, okay, how am I going to fit all the stuff inside that airplane? The servos, the retracts, all the different things. How are you going to fit that into a wing? I mean, an airplane that's only 60 inches. Now, if you're building a 150-inch wingspan airplane, it's a totally different world. You have room to get your hands in between the ribs. It's like almost like working on a real airplane, a full-scale airplane. I shouldn't say real because anything that flies is a real airplane. But it's almost like working with a full-scale airplane. That's the reason I love my giant-scale airplanes. They're so easy to work in. I applaud the people who build some of these really small, very detailed and scaled, very functional airplanes because they're working with microsystems at that time. To me, I call those microsystems. You know, you got small servos, small retracts. You know, when people, to me, they're much more skilled than I am. A person that could build a GB, let's say with a 40-inch wing that's totally scale and make it with a light wing load and make it so it will fly, that's one type of an airplane because the motor's going to already be heavy. But somebody who then takes and builds, let's say, a 60-inch P-51 with working retracts, flaps, all the systems, that's a lot of skill. Then you take somebody who builds like a small twin, and you know, they get all that systems to fit into that micro. The cubic volume inside a small airplane is so much different than a giant scale or you know, what I call a mega scale. You know, my stuff that has a 180-inch wing, totally different world. Like my MSL2 has a 188-inch wingspan. The fuselage is cavernous. I mean, you could fit a 6-year-old child inside the fuselage. So you need to think, what size am I going to build my airplane? Also think about the cost of the size. If you're going to build 80 inches or more, you're going to have a pretty big engine in there or electric motor. You're going to have pretty large systems. The bigger an airplane gets, the heavier and more expensive retract landing gears get. You know, if you look at a jumbo jet after a crash, one thing that usually survives a crash is the landing gear. You can see them laying there in the smelting wreckage. Landing gear are some of the strongest and most dense parts of the entire airplane. So when you start to build a giant scale airplane, if you don't want those landing gears bending all the time, they could end up being 10 to 15% of the weight of the whole aircraft. My B-36, the landing gear weighed almost 20 pounds, and the targeted weight of that airplane was 100 pounds. So a 20th of that airplane was going to be landing gear weight. So when you're thinking about what you're going to build, you need to write down a checklist. And in that checklist has everything that you need to put in that airplane, and then start looking online at the size of the servos, the size of the retracts, and figuring out, okay, can I put everything in it that I want to design for that size? Okay, so, you know, the most important thing in your design of an airframe is to think about, how am I going to meet a targeted weight with the center of gravity that's required? So like I said, I love using the GB because the GB has very short nose moment because the original had a big old honking heavy ass motor hanging out there. Okay, if this was like today's modern turbine, the nose would be way out here because they don't weigh anything, a turboprop. So hopefully what I've described has made sense. Now what I'm going to talk about when you're deciding what airplane you want to fly, you also need to, in that checklist, understand all the things that's going to be required to design it. So let's say you are pretty good at AutoCAD and you want to build a Stearman. Okay, a Stearman has a bunch of ribs in those wings. Okay, some of those ribs are the exact same rib, just placed out, you know, along the entire chord of the wing. The bulkheads in a Stearman, believe it or not, are pretty simple to design. If you just get a 3 view and have it show some of the sections, you can take a Stearman take that drawing into AutoCAD, and then you can draw on top of it and basically draw enough parts off that to make your Stearman. But the amount of time you're going to have drawing a Stearman versus drawing a Piper Cub is going to be vastly different. Because a Piper Cub, it's only got one wing. It's a high wing. It has a tubular fuselage, which you can design to be wood or tubular. There's just a lot less parts, I think, is what I'm trying to get to you. Now, I'm using fixed gear airplanes in that example. The reason I'm doing that is because when you go to draw an aircraft that you're going to design 100% yourself, I would not start with a P-51, because as you draw that in AutoCAD, you're going to have to already find some retracts out there that you can draw in CAD or have CAD drawings and embed those into your drawings to make sure everything fits, the hard points for the landing gear and all that. The moment you decide to design your own aircraft, you need to do that list of all the systems that go into it, but then you need to have a sub list. How do the wings come on and off of it? Okay, if it's a 60-inch wing, you might be able to leave the wings one piece on the fuselage, turn it sideways, and fit it in your van or a trailer. If it's a 188-inch wingspan, the wings are going to have to come off. When you're designing the airframe, you have to understand how to design all of that into it. And I'm going to cover all of that in future videos of actually how to do it. But when it comes to retracts, you need to have an understanding of how to mount those hard points in the wings so that they're going to be structurally strong enough, but you're not building them way, way, way too strong. Model aircraft are so overbuilt because we do bad landings. I saw a Piper, I can't remember which Piper it was. It was the single engine with retracts. Arrow? Maybe it's a Piper Arrow. Had a landing once where it bounced 2 or 3 times, and I thought, man, that's hard on those retracts. And right as he taxied off the runway, the right gear collapsed. And so full-scale airplanes are not made to bounce on retracts. Model airplanes, we land bad. Even with the tens of thousands of flights I've got, I still have the occasional bad landing. So with model aircraft, we do overbuild them, but we don't want to overbuild it so much that it's just incredibly heavy. Okay? So, you really need to start your checklist if you're going to design your own airframe. A, what's the airplane? What's the wingspan? What's it going to be powered with? What kind of radio you're putting in it? Try to make your first airplane a fixed landing gear, not a retract. Try to make the first airplane you design maybe your own design, like my MSL-1 and MSL-2 were my own designs. Okay, and I'm gonna cover all that in the future videos. I don't want to get into the future videos are going to cover how many systems are going to be in their design, what airfoils are going to be used, what program will you use to design it, drawing and designing the aircraft. That's going to be a very long video. So these are all different chapters in the series I'm going to be doing. There's going to be 12 chapters totally in this video series. And hopefully by the time you're done with it, you'll have a pretty good understanding at least of the tools and everything you need to be able to comprehend to build your own airframe. Now, if you just want to build a fuselage with a horizontal stab, a vertical stab, a wing, and put a motor on it, which is going to be one of the things we first talk about when I get into how you're actually designing the airframe, I would really recommend doing that because it's a blast. You could make it whatever you want it to look like. Just build a fuselage, build a horizontal stab, vertical stab, wing, motor, even maybe put some metal landing gear, aluminum landing gear on it. You will learn so much by drawing your first airplane. I don't want you to get frustrated. If you're going to pick an Aero Coupe or, an Airacobra, the fighter plane, if you're going to pick a P-51, a P-38, if you ever picked a P-38 to be the first airplane you're going to draw and design, man, you're Superman. I mean, you're Wonder Woman. You are a absolute rock star, because I don't even want to draw a P-38. Those booms and getting all the coolers and everything right, That's one plane I do not want to ever draw, okay? Could I draw it? Sure. If I won the lottery and somebody wanted to pay me $10,000 to do the drawing, sure, I'd do it. But that's pretty much it for this video, everybody. I'm not trying to scare you away from doing this, and I don't want to get too technical in this first video. I just want you all to understand that, you know, there's always that saying, you know, you got to crawl before you walk, and you got to walk before you can run. That is such a generic phrase that's used everywhere, but there's enough truth in it that if you have the perseverance and the persistence and the drive and the time and the money, you could learn to design any airframe you wanted to. Okay, I've had so many people at air shows or the fly-in say to me, I could never do that. I don't believe you. You could do that. You just don't have the self-confidence or maybe you just don't have the time, okay? And I'm not putting anybody down. You know, if you've got 5 kids, 3 hobbies, you know, all of that, you may not have the time to sit down and spend 150 hours over 2 or 3 months to draw an airframe, okay? Or 10 hours to draw a very simple airframe. Okay, the B-36 had hundreds, like 300 or 400 hours of drawing to get it all right. Could I design a little 40 size aircraft in 3 hours? Probably. I mean, as good as I've gotten with CAD and my CompuFoil programs, I could probably design an entire airframe that we could slap an electric motor on or a 40 size glow and go fly it. But you just got to try, okay? Now, I am going to cover in the future, you know, what programs to use and all of that and help you understand how to use them. You know, a lot of people want to draw everything in 3D right now. I don't draw my airframes to be printed on my plotter in 3D. I usually draw my planes all in 2D AutoCAD first, the entire airframe. Then I will import that into 3D to see if the parts fit and all the geometry's right. So I do a virtual build of the entire airplane. It takes a lot of time. Then I'm ready to go plot out the drawings and start cutting parts. Okay, so I hope you found this informative, everybody. We're going to dive into this deep. So I'm trying to make this 12 chapters. I'm trying to make it so that you can retain what I'm explaining, because if you did one long video, look, most of us can't. I can't retain. If a video lasts more than 45 minutes for me, I'm out. I'm done. You know, so that's what I'm trying to do here, everybody. So thanks for watching my videos. If you got any questions, of course, send me an email and ask. My captains and first officers will see this first on my Patreon, and then the navigators later on, and then this will be opened up to YouTube later. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you see the dates like 3 months ago, it's because this is offered to my Patreons first. So rock on, everybody. Have an awesome day. And I hope this is a help to you. Be safe.